many of you are gonna be competing in that? Yeah, a few? Wow. What are you gonna do?
Mile, 800, 200-meter hurdles, and 4x4.
How do you think that's gonna go? You excited?
Yeah.
Yeah? And what about you? What are you doing?
800 and a mile.
Nice, okay. Cool. How long have you been practicing for track?
Like running or an actual sport?
This sport this season.
Yeah, this season.
3 weeks?
Probably.
3 weeks? Alright, cool. Alright, so psychological dependence. What number are we on? Can anyone tell me?
7.
7. Alright. Psychological dependence. That is the belief that the substance is a necessary part of someone's day. So I have a story today, surprisingly. But I used to work at Menards, and I would work in the yard with a bunch of other guys, and I was a forklift driver. And one of them I knew from high school, and he was, I think, 19 years old when I was working there, and he had to take so many breaks throughout the day just to go and hit his Juul, which we know has nicotine in it. And he was so addicted that when he wouldn't get it in time, he would get so shaky that he would have to stop driving his forklift because it was dangerous to be driving it. He didn't have steady enough hands. So that's how quickly his body felt the withdrawal of nicotine when he was just working an 8-hour shift. So he would have to either take breaks throughout the day or he wouldn't be able to do his job properly. So withdrawal could be distress or depression, and your mind wants the drug. And the mental association with a specific time of day. So he would take these breaks at the same time every single day. And if he couldn't, like I said, he would get really shaky and irritable. But it was like an alarm went off in his head when he needed to go take a break, to go and get more of his nicotine.
And class, that's what makes addiction so tricky, is like, humans, we're creatures of habit, right? Like, it's better for us to be on a routine or a schedule. And so when you get used to that, you start to associate specific things or times of the day with that addiction, with that, your brain gets ready for that dopamine release at that time. I had a friend who would go out with his friends, which there's nothing wrong with going out and socializing and having a beer. But the problem was when he'd go out with his friends, then they'd all take a smoke break together, right? Well, my friend was trying to quit smoking, but he didn't want to not hang out with his friends, right? So he would go like 2 weeks without smoking, and he'd be doing really well. And then he'd meet his friends out for a beer on a Saturday night, and they'd be at the bar, and then his friends would go like, hey, we're gonna step outside and take a smoke break, right? And that would trigger for him, and he'd step outside and take a smoke break with them. And then he'd be right back to smoking again the next day, right? And that 2 weeks worth of work he had done to try to break that habit would just restart. And now he's right back in, and then he'd end up smoking for another 6 months, and then he'd be like, I gotta knock this, right? And so he'd try to quit again. But when he ever got together with that group of friends, it would trigger that situation would trigger like, oh, this is what's supposed to happen here. His brain would start going like, hey, you're with your friends, you're going out for a smoke break, dopamine coming, and then he'd end up falling back into that habit.
Yeah, and we can see here Dr. Mark Willenbring, who is the Director of Treatment and Recovery Research at the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. He says that addiction is the disorder of young people. And can we remember a few lessons ago, we talked about smoking companies targeting young people? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember why?
Because their brains are fully developed.
Sorry, what?
Because their brains aren't fully developed.
Yep. And can you get a customer for longer if they're younger or older?
Younger.
Younger, yeah. So we can get them, not we, but the companies can get them hooked on nicotine and have them as customers for way longer if they're younger. So in your group, we'll do the same shoulder partner as before, so you don't have to get up yet. And we will discuss why addiction is the disorder of young people. So really quick, just a couple minutes.
Because probably because
I'm trying to think. But we're starting. Yeah.
you're like more likely to get like addicted to it. Yeah. Yeah, and if you're doing it for a long period of time. 95%. I feel like it's 90.
All right. So as we were talking about earlier, addiction starts early. Addiction starts early. And 95% of people who are dependent on substances started before they were 20 years old. How old was the boy in my story earlier?
19.
He was 19. And that was not the age that he started using nicotine. So he had been hooked on it for a couple years before then. Probably started when he was around 17. And addiction freezes the brain at that developmental stage. So if he started using nicotine when he was 17, we know that the brain doesn't fully develop until 25. So if it's frozen at 17, he's missing 8 years of development that he probably won't be able to recover. So his brain will be the 17-year-old brain for the rest of his life.
Class, when it talks about your brain freezes at development, it's talking about in relation to thinking about consequence and processing like impacts of decisions you're making. And when I was in my ed psychology class back a few years ago, they had a guest speaker who came in and she was a parole officer who was a psychologist. And so, or she graduated with a degree in psychology, but she was a parole officer, which meant she deals with people who are coming out of serving time for whatever crimes, and then they have to make sure they don't break the law for a certain amount of time, right? So they're on parole when they get out, and then if they have to check in with her, and if they don't break the law for a certain amount of time, then they go off parole and they're just like everybody else, right? They don't have to check in, they just live their lives, right? It's kind of a transition period. And she talked about this guy, she was talking to us about addiction, exactly what we're talking about today. And she was talking about this guy who became a meth addict. We'll talk about what methamphetamine is next lesson, but he became a meth addict at like 15 years old, right? And she talked about how your brain development, when it comes to thinking about impulsive decisions and consequences, freezes at whatever stage you become an addict at. And so she said, this guy now is in his 30s, and he's had multiple stints in prison related to his addiction with meth. But she said he gets out of prison and he knows he can't get into trouble. He got out of prison, but if he got anything happen that was other than like a traffic violation, he would automatically go back to prison for like 4 years. And he knew that was gonna happen, right? And he was at his girlfriend's house and they got into an argument. And he got mad and he took a baseball bat and went into the garage and bashed up her car, okay? Now, maybe getting out that aggression on the car felt good in the moment, right? But because he reacted like that, this impulsive, angry reaction, he got thrown back into prison for 4 years for bashing on the rearview mirror and the windshield of her car with a baseball bat. Does that seem like that's a reasonable reaction? No, like 4 years. Think about where you are right now. 4 years from now, you guys will all be getting ready for your senior year of high school. Like that seems like a long time from now to me. That guy was going away for that long, right? For 2 minutes worth of vandalizing his girlfriend's car over a dumb fight, right? And all of us in here would be like, oh yeah, don't do that, right? Like, slow down, don't do that. That seems like a bad idea. Except in that moment, impulsive decision, his brain's not at a place where he's thinking down the road. And that tied into his addiction and his brain development and how that stunted his brain development. So when you become an addict to something, it changes your brain chemistry when you're developing. Does that make sense? Somewhat? Any questions on that?
Is he still in jail?
Well, she didn't tell us when that happened. She was a lady that was like in her 50s. So that could have happened 25 years earlier. She just told us about this guy, so that she worked with in her career. As an example, she was telling us that example for the exact reason we're talking about it today, was because she was talking about brain development, specifically in terms of addiction.
Yeah, so the power of nicotine, out of all teenagers who smoke one cigarette, about 42 or half will become regular smokers. So that's almost 1 in 2 people and teenagers who smoke. They'll become regular smokers and addicted to nicotine. And then 1/3 of all teenagers who try smoking will die from smoking related illnesses. in smokeless tobacco, of the 14 million Americans who use smokeless tobacco, about 4.2 million are under the age of 21. So that's almost 1/3 too, that are under 21. And about 2.1 million started using smokeless tobacco at or before the age of 13. So nicotine is in smokeless tobacco. And if they start at the age of 13, how long will they have missed from their developmental progress? If our brain stops the development at 25. 12 years, yeah. Yeah, so they'll be making decisions like a 12 or 13-year-old. Early starters, there's a direct link between the earlier a person uses a substance and how powerful their psychological or physical dependence will get. That's number 10. Right here, earlier start equals more powerful dependence. Oh, don't read that. What's the best way to combat that? What's the best way to combat a more powerful dependence? You just don't start. Just don't start. All right, so after you quickly fill that out, we're gonna do another mix and mingle. Yep, these are great. These are great. Yeah. All right. So everybody finished filling that out? No? Okay, quickly. We have things to do. All right, stand up. Mingle, mingle. I remember who everybody went with from Monday, so you need to have a new partner. Yep, everybody up. Everybody up. I won't start until everybody's up.
Let's go.
It's okay to cross the center line of
Yep.
the classroom
Yep.
too, yep?
Kayla, get moving. You're leaning on your desk. You're literally taking one step.
I just don't like walking.
Yeah, mingle, Kayla, mingle.
I do not know what. I do what.
I just
Mingle was
really
You're mingling.
All right, toe to toe. The first person will tell the name of the feel-good chemical, and the second person will tell the 2 types of addiction.
Does anybody not have a partner?
Oh, yeah.
It's dopamine.
I'll be a partner.
Okay, what's the next one?
Unless there's, everybody got partners?
It's physical.
You need a partner?
Yeah, okay.
You need a partner? All right.
Great.
Okay, we're good.
Same thing as Monday, thumbs up when you're done. Okay, remix.
Remix.
I got long eyelashes. Why you care about your eyelashes?
No.
Talking about them. I got long eyelashes. What are you gonna do with your eyelashes?
Hi.
Why? It's too long. Why are you gonna clear eyelashes?
Okay, toe to toe.
They're longer than
Toe to toe. First person tell the substance that makes tobacco so addictive, and the second person give the definition for tolerance.
It's nicotine. Is the body resisting the effects of wow. To get this
Thumbs up. Back of the room, thumbs up. Okay, great. That's all I have for today.